When it comes down to building a biotech or pharma company in the US in 2026, your clinical expertise and insight will give you a lot of invaluable experience with the drug development process and maybe with what happens in the lab. But the actual reality of running the tests and the clinical trials that go into running these experiments is a whole different experience. There's a lot of thought that you have to put into things around like business formation and managing the regulatory landscape and managing the different vendors that you will have to work with and allocating any sort of capital you may have. So this guide is going to give you a practical, actionable guide on how to navigate from formation of your company through your first clinical trial in 2026 with current cost, timelines, and industry best practices. So before we even talk about clinical trials, let's talk about your company formation. Because what happens is a lot of first-time biotech and pharmaceutical founders, they get excited about the science and they sort of skip the boring admin corporate stuff. And so if you're somebody that's trying to start a company for the first time, the first thing you want to do is incorporate as a Delaware C-Corp. And I know that sounds like basic advice, but you'd be surprised at how many people try to run a biotech company as an LLC or incorporate it in their home state. So registering as a Delaware C-Corp is just standard. And while we're on the topic of Delaware, you have to make sure that you stay on top of your Delaware franchise tax filings because speaking from experience, missing that up, the penalties can stack up fast. The next step is forming a regulatory strategy that really needs to encompass what type of drug or therapeutic area you're going after. And I say this because the FDA pathway that you choose will determine everything when it comes to how you want to either start this company or run the clinical trials that will follow. It will also determine a lot of things like your fundraising strategy and sort of like the way that you're going to interact with investors. So form your company and then figure out the regulatory strategy that you're going to adopt for that product. Especially now in 2026, where the regulatory landscape in the US is shifting in a very interesting way. The FDA, for example, just announced that they're moving away from requiring 2 pivotal trials as a default for drug approval. This was published by the FDA commissioner in a piece in the New England Journal of Medicine, saying that running one well-controlled study plus having confirmatory evidence is now the default standard. And that's a massive change from just last year, right? Because for decades, the expectation was that you run 2 trials. But now with one strong trial with supporting evidence, you can get across the finish line. So what does that mean for you as a founder? It really just means that your development timeline and your budget could potentially be cut significantly. And that's with a big but, like the one trial that you run has to be very airtight. Starting from your protocol design to your statistical plan to the type of endpoints that you select, everything has to be bulletproof. So in some ways, it raises the bar on execution, even though it lowers the bar on volume. Another big thing that is happening in the US is the FDA's new guidance on Bayesian statistical methods. They dropped a draft guidance early in January of this year that essentially formalizes how you can use Bayesian approaches in pivotal trials. Now, why does this matter? It matters because the Bayesian methods let you incorporate prior data like results from earlier studies or external data sources into your trial analysis. So if you're a startup or a smaller company that cannot afford to run massive trials, this could be a game changer because you can potentially run a smaller, more efficient trial while still meeting the evidentiary standard. So you have incorporated your company, you have selected the regulatory pathway that you want to follow. The next thing that you need to do on your checklist is to get a pre-IND meeting. And this is one of the most underutilized tools. And it's so funny because the FDA will literally sit down with you before you file anything and tell you what they want to see. They'll give you feedback on things like your trial design. They'll give you feedback on the endpoints that you have selected. They'll give you feedback on your manufacturing plan, and all of that is free. And while it's free in the sense that you don't pay for the meeting, but you'll have to pay for a consultant to help you prepare the briefing document for this meeting, and you should. But the meeting itself is invaluable. And we've seen founders skip the pre-IND meeting because they think it'll slow them down. And it won't. On the contrary, what will slow you down is filing an IND and then it gets a clinical hold because you didn't address something that the FDA would have flagged for you in the first place. So take that meeting. Now that we have done the three most important things on your checklist, which is one, forming your company and choosing your regulatory pathway, and then taking your pre-IND meeting, let's get down into the nitty-gritty. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is trial design. This is where most of your money is going to go, and it's where a lot of first-time founders make their most expensive mistakes when trying to launch in the US. Let me give you the numbers up front just so we are on the same page. As of 2025 and 2026, here's what you're looking at on average. A phase 1 clinical trial in the US costs between $1 to $5 million. A phase 2 will cost anywhere from $7 to about $20 million. And a phase 3 can be anywhere from $20 million to over $100 million, depending on your therapy area. Oncology and rare disease tend to be on the higher end of that. Dermatology and endocrinology tend to be on the lower end. But here's what those averages don't tell you, which is that the cost per patient can vary widely based on every decision that you make at the protocol level. Any additional blood draw, any additional imaging scan, any additional follow-up visit that you add to your protocol is going to cost money. Clinical procedure costs alone often make up about 15 to 20% of your overall trial budget. So when you're designing your protocol, you need to ask yourself, for every single procedure, does this actually serve the primary endpoint that you're trying to achieve? Or are you just doing it because it will be nice to have? Another thing we want to talk about here at the level of your trial design or protocol design is something known as adaptive trial design. Because in 2026, founders have the real advantage, and they have a lot more advantages from founders from even 3 years ago. An adaptive trial design lets you modify your trial based on interim data without compromising the statistical validity. And so what that means is that you can adjust your sample size, you can drop a dose arm that's not working, or you can shift your patient population mid-trial. The US FDA is actually actively encouraging this. Their Bayesian guidance basically opens the door to more sophisticated adaptive designs that were harder to get approved before. Here's a real-world example of how this works. Let's say you're running a phase 2 trial with 3 dose levels. Now, instead of powering the entire trial for all these 3 arms from the start, you can use an adaptive design that does an interim analysis at, say, 50% enrollment. And if the dose arm is clearly not performing, then you drop it. And now you're only enrolling patients in the arms that actually have a shot. That's going to save you money, it's going to save you time, and it gets patients off a dose that is not helping them. So that's it. You have to think about all the creative ways to get your protocol adaptable to work on what's working and cut back on what's not. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is endpoints, because this is where we also see a lot of founders get in trouble. Everyone wants to use overall survival as their primary endpoint because it feels like a gold standard. If you're running a phase 3 oncology trial, sure. But for earlier stage trials, you need a surrogate endpoint that's accepted by the FDA and that you can measure in a reasonable time frame. You can talk about this to the FDA in your pre-IND meeting. Ask them explicitly, what endpoints will you accept for an accelerated approval, for example. You can also ask them what kind of surrogate endpoint they'll accept for a breakthrough therapy designation, and you want them to give you this response in writing before you finalize your protocol. One more thing on design is that there is something that is known as decentralized clinical trials. The FDA finalized their guidance of this in late 2024 and then dropped a snapshot update in October of last year. Basically, what this means is that you can now run clinical trials where some or all of the trial activities happen remotely at the patient's home or at a local lab, and also can be facilitated with telehealth visits. This is huge for reducing cost, and it's also huge for improving patient retention. The caveat with this is that your protocol needs to be very specific about which elements are decentralized and how you're maintaining data integrity. Because the FDA is actually very clear that the same regulatory standards apply whether your trial is at a hospital or in someone's living room. So you don't get a pass just because a certain aspect of your study was decentralized. Okay, so now you've got your company set up, you've got your regulatory strategy in place, you've designed your trial. Now comes the part that will actually keep you up at night, the operational aspect. And the first part of the operations is patient recruitment. This is the number one problem that will keep you up at night for sure. And it's such a big problem, and a lot of first time operators always sort of underestimate this. They underestimate either the time or the actual cost of recruiting patients into a clinical trial in the US. Patient recruitment alone will eat 30 to 40% of your budget. And let me just say that again, recruitment alone will be a third or almost half of your entire clinical trial budget. The per patient cost for a pivotal study averages about $41,000. So if you're enrolling 200 patients and you have a 20% screen failure rate, that means you're potentially spending over $10 million just on patient recruitment alone. So how do you solve this? The first thing you have to do is design your trial with the patient in mind from the start. That means that you have to think about how to reduce the number of inpatient visits. You have to think about using decentralized elements where you can. You have to make your inclusion and exclusion criteria as broad as the science allows. And you have to be very creative with how you actually want to reach these patients. Another way that you can navigate around this patient bottleneck is to think global from the start. US-based trials cost 30 to 50% more than the equivalent of such trials that happen in Western Europe, for example. And they also cost about 60 to 80% more than trials that happen in other parts of Asia. And I'm not saying you should outsource everything, but if your protocol supports multi-site international enrollment, you should at least evaluate it because it can dramatically change your economics. Now, this will lead us into the CRO question. Should you hire a contract research organization or should you build in-house? And here's my honest take. If you're a first-time founder running your first trial in the US, you probably need a CRO for things you don't know how to do. And that will include things like site monitoring, data management, regulatory submissions, but just don't hand them the keys and walk away. Because the number one complaint that we hear is that a CRO overpromises and underdelivers. And sometimes that's because the founder or the company just wasn't involved enough in the day-to-day. You need to own the relationship with your site. You need to be in the weeds on enrollment numbers. You need to review your data as it comes in, not quarterly. The CRO works for you, but the trial is your responsibility. And they'll never care about your trial as much as you do. They're running 10, 20 other trials just like yours, so you're not that special. This is also where you can leverage a lot of technology because there's a lot of technology and a lot of new platforms that give you real-time visibility into your trial data and enrollment rates and site performance, and can also help you sort of track any adverse events and protocol deviations in real time without waiting on a CRO report. You're also able to use tools like a digital patient twin. At my company, Infuse, for example, we have built digital patient twins that can also specifically be used to simulate patient responses before starting enrollment, and this sort of very real-time visibility CTMS dashboard that you can get a CRO to use if you want to. So one more operational thing that trips up first-time sponsors is your relationship with your clinical site. Your PIs are the backbone of your trial, and if they're not engaged or motivated, your trial is going to struggle. So visit your site, build real relationships with your PIs, understand their constraints, staffing, patient flow, understand if they're doing other competing studies, because a good site can be the difference between you hitting your enrollment targets or missing them by 6 months to a year. Okay, now let's talk money, because at the end of the day, none of this happens without capital. So we're briefly going to talk about how to structure your fundraising around your clinical milestones. Here's a simple framework that you should use. Your seed round should get you through your pre-IND work and building your team, and also getting any sort of preclinical data, and also coming up with your regulatory strategy. Your Series A should fund you through your IND filing and into the early phase of your trial, usually your first patient in and some interim data. Your Series B is where you're powering through the clinical trial to the data readout. So each round should be designed to get you to a value inflection milestone that justifies the next round. The mistake that we see founders make is raising too little for where they are in the clinical timeline. If you raise just enough to start your trial, but not enough to get to any meaningful data, you're going to be fundraising again right around when you need to be focused on execution or keeping an eye out on the performance of the study. In the US, there is still a lot of opportunities to get like grant funding if you're looking for additional capital through agencies like the NIH or BARDA or CARB-X if you're into infectious diseases. So these are real dollars that are available to clinical stage biotech founders, and you can also get this through SBIR and STTR programs. You will, however, need to apply aggressively. The hit rate is lower than venture capital, but the capital is free. So to close out, let me share 5 of the biggest mistakes that we've seen first-time biotech founders make when it comes to running clinical trials overall in the US. The number 1 mistake in 2026 is skipping the pre-IND meeting. I already said this, but I'm saying it again because it's that important. The second mistake is designing a protocol with a committee. Your protocol should be designed by a small team of people who deeply understand the science and the regulatory requirements. When you let too many voices in, advisors, investors, board members, all adding their favorite endpoint, what you're going to end up with is a bloated protocol that just costs twice as much as it needs to. Mistake number 3 is underestimating recruitment. Getting patients is going to be hard and you have to be ready for it. Unless you have a site that has guaranteed access to a massive patient database, you need to give yourself enough time, or you can try to simulate early on what that would look like when you're trying to get these patients in. Mistake number 4 is not budgeting for the unexpected. You have to budget for scope changes, you have to budget for site amendments, you have to budget for protocol amendments, you have to budget for FDA information requests, because all of these will happen. So you need to budget at least 20 to 30% contingency buffer into your budget. If you don't use it, great, but you probably will. All right, so if you've made it this far, that means you are serious. So let me leave you with a few things that you can start this week if you're ready to start building out your dream biotech or pharmaceutical company and run a clinical trial in the US. Number 1, nail your regulatory pathway. Go to fda.gov and read the guidance documents relevant to your therapeutic area and figure out whether you're going to be pursuing a 505b1 or 505b2 or a biologics pathway. This will determine everything. The next step is to, again, request your pre-IND meeting. You can do this even before you have a complete data package. The FDA is way more accessible than you think, you guys. And step 3 is to build your regulatory and clinical team before your commercial team. I know it's tempting to hire a sales team first, but you need a VP of regulatory with a strong regulatory consultant from day 1. Step 4 is to start writing grant applications now. SBIR phase 1 deadlines come around multiple times a year, so get your applications in. And even if you don't win, the process of writing it forces you to articulate your clinical strategy. And step 5 is to join the community. Find other people like yourself that are running clinical trials or that are around the same stage as you, and just try to hang out with them as much as you can. Clinical trials are too complex, they're too expensive to figure out alone, so find yourself some support. I make these videos once a year because I know that running a clinical trial is one of the hardest things you'll ever do as a founder. It's expensive, it's slow, it's full of surprises that no one warns you about. Everything is constantly changing, but it's also a very rewarding and impactful thing, because at the end of that trial, if you did it well, there are patients whose lives are going to be different because of the work that you put in. That's why I make these videos. That's why I'm building the company I'm building, because we need more founders in this space and we need them to succeed. So if any of this was helpful, subscribe, drop a comment telling me what specific topic you want me to go deeper on. It could be regulatory, strategy, it could be fundraising, it could be patient recruitment or pre-protocol simulation, and I'll make the video. So go build something that matters, and I'll see you on the next one next year.